Kale had never seen the grand chamber this full. Every seat in the massive circular hall was taken. Representatives from 312 species filled the rows that stretched upward toward the glass ceiling, where the cold light of distant stars came through. Kale stood at the back of the observation deck, on the council flagship, watching the session on a large display screen. He was young for his kind, barely old enough to hold his rank as a communications officer, and everyone around him kept saying this was the most important day in galactic history. Grand Arbiter Volek stood at the center of the chamber. He was ancient. His skin had turned the deep gray that came with centuries of life, and his voice carried a heaviness that made entire rooms go quiet. When he raised his hand, 300 species stopped talking at once. For 37 years, Volek said, we have watched, we have studied. The species known as humanity has expanded beyond its home star at a speed that has no equal in our records. They have taken 41 worlds. They have built shipyards, mining stations, and military posts without asking anyone, without signing any treaty, without permission. He paused and let the silence do its work. They were given warnings. They ignored them. They were given boundaries. They crossed them. And now their expansion threatens the territorial integrity of 9 council member species. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted agreement. Some stamped their feet or slammed their tails against the floor in the way their species showed anger. Kale watched it all from the screen and felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had never actually met a human. Most people in the galaxy had not. Humans were new. They had only been in space for about 200 years, which was nothing compared to species that had been starfaring for thousands. But in those 200 years, humans had done things that made the oldest civilizations nervous. Volek raised his hand again. Silence returned. I call for a vote, he said. Total war against the species known as humanity. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. Every single species voted yes. 312 civilizations, many of which had not agreed on anything in centuries, united by one shared feeling. Fear. Not of what humans had done, but of what they might do if no one stopped them. The chamber filled with ceremonial war chants. Battle hymns from dozens of cultures blended together into a sound that was both beautiful and terrible. On the flagship, officers around Kale stood straighter. Someone whispered that this was history. Kale nodded, but said nothing. The formal declaration of war was prepared within the hour. It was transmitted on every communication channel the Council had, aimed directly at Earth's star system. Along with the message, the Council broadcast a visual display of its military strength. The combined fleet, drawn from 58 species, consisted of 40,000 warships. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the known galaxy. Battleships the size of small cities, carriers loaded with fighter craft, destroyers with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. The message was clear: surrender or be destroyed. On Earth, it was a Wednesday afternoon. Una was sitting in a conference room on the 32nd floor of the United Earth Council building in Seoul. The windows showed a gray sky and the distant shimmer of the Han River. She was in the middle of a sentence about agricultural subsidies for the outer colonies when her aide walked in and handed her a tablet without a word. Una looked at the screen. She read it once, then again. Her expression did not change. The people around the table watched her, waiting. The Galactic Council has declared war on us, she said, in the same voice she had been using to talk about rice production quotas. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. How many ships? Asked the defense advisor. 40,000. From how many species? 58. The defense advisor nodded slowly, wrote something on his notepad, and said, I will send a memo to Orbital Command. Good, Una said. Now, can we finish the budget discussion? We still have the water treatment funding to go over. And they did. They finished the budget meeting. The war declaration sat on the tablet next to Yuna's coffee cup, and nobody mentioned it again until the meeting ended, 40 minutes later. 8,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, Commander Tejo received the same transmission at Orbital Defense Command. He was eating a tangerine when his lieutenant brought it to him. He read through the entire document, which was 14 pages long and filled with dramatic language about justice and galactic order. And then he set it down. "Push my lunch reservation back by 30 minutes, he told his lieutenant. "Just 30? I am not skipping lunch for this." He pulled up the fleet data. 40,000 ships. He had seen bigger numbers in simulations. He typed a short message to Yuna's office, confirming that Orbital Command was aware of the situation and would respond according to standard protocol. Then he finished his tangerine. Earth's official response to the declaration of war was issued 6 hours later. It was not late because it took time to write. It was late because it got stuck in an administrative approval queue. Someone in the communications department had filed it under non-urgent diplomatic correspondence, and it sat in a digital inbox for 4 hours before a clerk noticed the word war in the subject line and moved it up the priority list. The response read, "The United Earth Council acknowledges your declaration of war. We will respond at our earliest convenience. In the meantime, please do not enter the Sol system without proper transit documentation. Unauthorized vessels will be subject to standard customs enforcement. Thank you for your communication." That was it. No threats, no counter-declaration, no dramatic speech. Just a polite note that sounded like it came from a parking authority. On the Council flagship, Kale watched the admirals read Earth's reply. Nobody spoke for a long time. War Marshal Dren, the commander of the combined fleet, read it 3 times, as if the real message might be hidden somewhere between the lines. "Are they mocking us?" one of the admirals asked. "They are insane," Dren said quietly, "or they do not understand what is coming." Ambassador Teleth, a junior diplomat who had argued against the war from the beginning, sat in the corner of the command room and said nothing. But Kale noticed something on his face that none of the admirals had. It was not confusion, and it was not amusement. It was worry. Not worry for the Council, worry for what the Council had just walked into. Because Teleth had read every report on humanity that existed in the galactic archives, and there was one detail that no one in this room seemed to care about. In 200 years of space travel, humanity had fought 4 wars. They had won all 4. And in not a single one of those wars had they fired the first shot. They always waited. They always responded calmly. And then they ended things so fast that the galaxy barely noticed. Kale looked at the admirals celebrating around him, already planning their victory formations, and felt that strange tightness in his chest again. He opened his personal log and typed a single line. "I do not think this will go the way they expect." 2 weeks after the declaration, the combined fleet jumped into the outer edges of the Sol system. 40,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation so wide it stretched across millions of kilometers. From the bridge of his flagship, War Marshal Dren watched the tactical display light up with the positions of his fleet. It was a beautiful sight. The largest military force in the history of the galaxy, organized and ready. He expected to find chaos on the other side. Scrambled defenses, emergency transmissions, maybe a desperate human fleet trying to form a defensive line. Every species in the galaxy did the same thing when faced with an invasion. They panicked. They gathered what they had, and they tried to hold the line. But when the sensors cleared, Dren found nothing. There was no fleet. There were no defense platforms. There were no emergency signals. The outer Sol system was quiet and cold and completely empty, except for a single automated buoy floating in the darkness. His communications officer read the buoy's broadcast out loud. Welcome to Sol. Speed limit enforced. Nobody on the bridge laughed. Dren ordered the fleet forward. They moved through the system in standard invasion formation, scanning everything. They passed the outer gas giants. They passed the asteroid belt. Nothing. No mines, no hidden weapons, no ambushes. Just empty space and old satellites that looked like they had been there for 100 years. It was not until the fleet reached Mars orbit that the sensors finally detected something. 12 ships. 12 small ships sitting in a loose formation about 200,000 kilometers ahead. They were not even in a combat stance. They were just floating there. Dren stared at the display. 12, he said. Yes, War Marshal. 12 vessels, frigate class, light armament. Is this a joke? No, War Marshal. These appear to be their only military assets in the area. Kale, standing at his communications station on the bridge, felt his stomach turn. Something was wrong. He could not explain it, but everything about this felt wrong. A species that had been given 2 weeks to prepare for an invasion of 40,000 ships had put 12 frigates in the way and nothing else. That was not bravery. That was not stupidity. That was something else entirely. On the bridge of the ESS Jindo, one of those 12 frigates, Captain Dowen was eating a cup of instant ramyun. The noodles were the spicy kind, the broth was still too hot, and the proximity alarm was making an annoying sound. 40,000 red dots filled the display like a cloud of insects. Hana, he said, slurping a mouthful of noodles. You done with that thing yet? Hana was in the engine room, surrounded by open panels and floating wires. She had spent the last 2 weeks modifying the Jindo's deflector array using a piece of alien technology that human intelligence had recovered years ago from a wrecked council probe. She had turned it into something new, a gravitational pulse emitter. When activated, it would send a wave of distorted spacetime across a wide area, making everything in range suddenly and impossibly heavy. Ships would stall, weapons would jam, engines would choke. Give me 2 more minutes, she said. You said that 20 minutes ago. And I will say it again in 20 more minutes. Do not rush Art. Dowen smiled and ate another bite of noodles. Dren, seeing no reason to wait, gave the order to attack. 40,000 ships opened fire at once. The volley was enormous. Plasma bolts, energy beams, and guided projectiles streaked across space in a wall of light, so bright it turned the bridge windows white. It was the largest coordinated strike in galactic military history. 8,000 kilometers above Earth, Tejo watched the volley on his screen. He was standing in the command center of orbital defense, hands behind his back, face calm. His lieutenant looked at him with wide eyes. Commander, they are firing. I can see that. Should we respond? Tejo waited 3 seconds. Then he said one sentence. Activate the grid. The orbital defense grid was not a fleet. It was not a space station. It was a network of 1,200 satellites spread across Earth's orbital space, and it had been there for 40 years. Most people on Earth forgot it existed. It was maintained by the Customs and Immigration Department, listed in government records as a border security system. It had never been fired in combat. Each satellite carried one weapon, a magnetic accelerator, and each accelerator held a simple tungsten rod, 2 meters long, weighing 2 tons. There was nothing special about the rods. They were just metal, solid, heavy, stupid metal. The accelerators fired. 1,200 tungsten rods launched simultaneously, each one accelerating to 80% of the speed of light in less than a second. They crossed the distance to the Council fleet in moments. They did not glow. They did not hum. They did not leave trails of light. They were just pieces of metal, moving so fast that the laws of physics turned them into the deadliest weapons the galaxy had ever seen. The Council ships had energy shields. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy used energy shields. They were designed to absorb and redirect energy-based attacks, plasma, lasers, particle beams. They were the foundation of galactic military defense, and had been for thousands of years. Energy shields do not stop a 2-ton tungsten rod moving at 80% of the speed of light. The rods hit the fleet like the fist of a god. In the first 90 seconds, 6,000 ships were destroyed, not disabled, not damaged, destroyed. Each rod punched through shields as if they were not there, passed through the hull without slowing down, and exited the other side. The kinetic energy released by each impact was equal to a small nuclear explosion. Ships burst apart. The ones nearby were thrown off course by shockwaves that rippled through space like waves in water. Kale grabbed the edge of his station as the flagship shook. The tactical display, which had been a solid wall of green, was turning red. Entire fleet sections were gone. Officers were screaming. Damage reports flooded every channel. Someone near him whispered in a voice that shook, "Their weapons are just metal. How is it just metal?" Then the second wave hit. Hana had finished her work. Dowan gave the order, and the Jindo activated the gravitational pulse. A wave of twisted spacetime rolled across the battlefield. Council ships shuddered and stopped. Engines died. Weapons locked. Thousands of warships hung in space like dead fish, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to do anything but watch as the grid fired again. And again. And again. Dren screamed the retreat order 11 minutes after the battle began. What was left of the combined fleet turned and ran. Of the 40,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, 14,000 limped out. The rest were debris. On Earth that evening, the battle was the third story on the news. The first was about a new coffee shop in Busan that had a 6-hour waiting line. The second was a football match recap. The anchor mentioned the battle briefly, noted that there were no human casualties, and moved on. Minho watched the broadcast from his barracks while drinking barley tea. He looked at the screen, looked at his tea, and shook his head. "Only 11 minutes, he said to nobody in particular. "I thought it would be longer." The emergency session was called within hours of the fleet's return. The Grand Chamber, which had been filled with war chants and celebration just weeks ago, was now filled with shouting and blame. Species that had stood together to vote for war were now pointing fingers at each other. Delegates screamed across the aisles. 2 ambassadors from rival species nearly came to blows near the front row. Security had to separate them. Grand Arbiter Volok stood at the center and tried to bring order. He raised his hand the way he always did, expecting silence. It did not come. He had to raise his voice for the first time in decades. Enough. The chamber quieted, but it was an angry quiet. The kind that sat in the air like heat before a storm. Volok called for a full intelligence briefing on humanity's military capabilities. The report was delivered by a senior council intelligence officer who had spent the last 2 weeks pulling together every piece of data the galaxy had on human military strength. He stood at the podium with a thin tablet in his shaking hands, and what he said next changed the mood in the room from anger to something much worse. Fear. "The system that destroyed the majority of our fleet," the officer began, "is designated by the humans as the sole orbital customs enforcement grid. It is not classified as a military asset. It falls under the authority of Earth's Customs and Immigration Department. Its primary listed function is the enforcement of transit regulations for unauthorized vessels entering the Sol system." The chamber was silent. The 12 ships that engaged our fleet were not a defense force. They were a routine patrol group on a standard border assignment. They were not reinforced. They were not given special orders. They simply responded to the presence of unauthorized vessels in their patrol zone, as per their normal duties. Someone in the back of the chamber made a sound like they were choking. Our analysis indicates that Earth's standing military fleet consists of approximately 800 combat-capable vessels. None of these were deployed during the engagement. Additionally, humanity maintains a reserve fleet of over 5,000 ships in storage facilities across their territory. These vessels can be activated and deployed within 48 hours. The officer paused. He looked up from his tablet and spoke the next words carefully. As of this morning, the United Earth Council has not issued a military mobilization order. Their armed forces remain at standard peacetime readiness. They have not called up reserves. They have not repositioned their fleet. Based on all available intelligence, humanity does not consider this war significant enough to change their normal military posture. The chamber erupted again, but this time the shouting was different. It was not anger. It was panic. 40,000 ships, the greatest armada in history, had been broken in 11 minutes by a customs enforcement system and a handful of patrol boats. And the humans had not even started trying. Ambassador Telek stood and asked to speak. Volek allowed it. Teleth walked to the podium, his steps careful and measured, and faced the chamber. I urged against this war, he said. I was ignored. Now I am urging for immediate peace negotiations. If we continue this conflict, we will not lose ships. We will lose species. Humanity has shown us clearly what they can do with their smallest tools. I do not want to learn what they can do with their largest ones. He was shouted down. Delegates called him a coward. One threw a drinking cup at him. But Kale, watching from the flagship's observation feed, noticed that Teleth was not afraid. He was the calmest person in the room. He had said what he needed to say, and he sat back down without another word. Over the next 3 days, 41 of the 58 species in the combined fleet quietly withdrew their ships. Their official reasons were varied. Maintenance needs, fuel shortages, domestic emergencies requiring their fleets at home. Everyone knew the real reason. They were running. Dren, who had lost 26,000 ships under his command, but refused to break, came before Volek with a new plan. He argued that the Sol system was too well defended, but humanity's outer colonies were not. They were spread thin across the galactic rim. Small farming worlds, mining stations, research outposts, places with millions of civilians and minimal military presence. If the Council could take even one of these worlds, it would prove that humanity could be hurt. It would give the remaining allies a reason to stay. Volek, desperate and out of options, approved the plan. On Earth, Sujin already knew. She sat in a small windowless office in the intelligence division of Earth Command, surrounded by screens showing intercepted Council communications, fleet movement data, and probability models she had built herself. She was 31 years old, spoke in a calm monotone that never changed whether she was ordering lunch or predicting a military invasion, and she had mapped out the Council's next 3 moves before Dren had even finished proposing them. She brought her analysis to a joint briefing with Teho and Yuna. The room was small. There was tea on the table. They will bypass Sol entirely, Sujin said. They will target our outer colonies. Specifically, the farming colony of New Gyeongju and the mining operation at Chenho Station. These are the 2 most populated and least defended targets within their remaining fleet's operational range. Yuna looked at the data on the screen. How many civilians? Combined, approximately 3 million. The room was quiet for a moment. Yuna's expression stayed the same, polite and composed, but something in her voice shifted. It became a little colder, a little more precise. Then we should make sure they are safe. Teho nodded and made the call. Sergeant Minho and his ground regiment, 2,000 soldiers, were assigned to New Gyeongju. They shipped out the next morning, with standard equipment and a large shipping container labeled Standard Colony Defense Kit. Nothing fancy, nothing secret. Just the tools that every human colony was supposed to have in case of emergency. When Minho's transport landed on New Gyeongju, he expected to find frightened civilians waiting to be evacuated. Instead, he found a colony that was already preparing to fight. The farmers of New Gyeongju had been listening to the news. They knew the council fleet was coming, and they had no intention of leaving. A retired naval engineer had already started converting a grain silo into a surface-to-orbit cannon using parts from a broken tractor and a mining drill. A group of farmers were welding scrap metal onto their vehicles, turning harvesters into armored transports. Near the colony's main square, a woman who looked about 70 years old was walking between groups of soldiers with a large basket, handing out freshly made rice cakes and telling everyone to eat properly before the fighting started. Minho stood in the middle of all this and watched. He was a big man, quiet by nature, and he had fought in 2 border conflicts before this. He had seen professional soldiers prepare for battle many times, but he had never seen anything like this. These were not soldiers. These were farmers and shopkeepers and school teachers, and they were getting ready for war with the same practical energy they used to prepare for a harvest. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was the first time he had smiled since receiving his deployment orders. 3 days later, Dren's fleet of 14,000 ships made the jump toward New Gyeongju. On the bridge of the flagship, Kale monitored the final preparations. He heard a senior officer say to another with forced confidence, "It is just a farming colony. How hard can it be?" Kale said nothing. He had stopped believing things would be easy a long time ago. New Gyeongju was a beautiful world. Green fields stretched to every horizon, broken only by low hills and the silver lines of irrigation channels. The sky was wide and pale blue, and the air smelled like wet soil and growing things. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. Dren's fleet arrived in orbit and scanned the surface. No orbital defense grid, no fleet, just 2,000 human soldiers, 3 million civilians, and endless farmland. Dren allowed himself a moment of relief. After the disaster at Seoul, he needed a victory. He needed proof that humans could be beaten. He chose not to bomb the colony from orbit. He wanted to capture it intact, to put human prisoners on display, to show the galaxy that the great and terrifying humans could be brought to their knees. He ordered 30,000 ground troops loaded into dropships and sent them down. It was the worst decision of his career. The first wave of dropships landed in the wide fields south of the colony's main settlement. The troops poured out in good order, forming up in the tall grass, moving forward in standard assault columns. The ground was firm under their feet. The air was warm. For about 90 seconds, everything seemed fine. Then the ground turned to liquid. Minho had buried agricultural seismic charges across every approach to the colony. These were tools designed to break up hard soil for planting. Hana had modified them before she left for orbit. Now, instead of loosening dirt, they liquefied the ground to a depth of 3 meters in a perfect circle around each charge. Alien soldiers who had been standing on solid earth suddenly found themselves waist-deep in mud that had been rock a moment ago. Tanks disappeared beneath the surface like stones dropped in water. Soldiers screamed and clawed at the ground as it swallowed them. The ones who made it through the mud fields found the irrigation system waiting for them. New Gyeongju's irrigation network covered the entire colony. Thousands of kilometers of pipes and channels, all connected to a central pumping station that drew water from underground rivers. Minho had turned the pressure up to maximum and fitted the output nozzles with narrow tips. The result was a network of water jets that could cut through solid steel at close range. When the first alien squads reached the outer fields, the sprinklers turned on. Except they were not sprinklers anymore. They were weapons, and the water hit with enough force to punch through armor plating and knock soldiers off their feet from 50 meters away. The aliens pushed forward anyway. They were trained soldiers from proud warrior species, and they did not stop just because the ground was trying to eat them and the farm equipment was trying to kill them. They reached the colony's outer buildings, expecting to find cover. The greenhouses were ambush points. Minho had placed small teams of soldiers inside each one, hidden behind rows of tomato plants and bean vines. The glass walls had been replaced with a clear material that stopped energy weapons but let kinetic rounds pass through. Alien soldiers walked past what looked like an empty greenhouse and received fire from every direction. The colonists knew every path, every ditch, every hiding spot on their land. Alien troops who tried to navigate the streets found themselves lost in a place where every alley looked the same and every building had a farmer with a rifle on the roof. In orbit, Darwin was having the time of his life. The Jindo darted between council capital ships like a bird flying between elephants. Hana's gravitational pulse disrupted enemy formations, making massive warships drift into each other. Darwin used the chaos to make attack runs, firing the Jindo's light guns at critical systems, sensors, communications arrays, engine vents, and then disappearing before anyone could get a targeting lock. He narrated his own maneuvers out loud. And he goes left. Beautiful turn. Oh, that was close. Now right. Right between the two big ones. Yes, perfect. Hana, you're seeing this, right? I am busy, Hana said from the engine room, where she was simultaneously keeping the gravitational pulse running and hacking into the Council Fleet's communications network. Once she was in, she did something that no military strategist in the galaxy could have predicted. She started broadcasting Korean trot music on every enemy channel. The cheerful, upbeat folk songs filled every cockpit, every bridge, every command center in the Council Fleet. Officers tried to switch channels. The music followed. They tried to shut down their communications entirely. Hana had locked them out. For the next several hours, every tactical discussion, every order, every desperate call for help was accompanied by the sound of a cheerful singer performing a love song about autumn leaves. It should not have been effective, but it was, not because the music was harmful, but because the aliens could not understand why it was happening. Was it a coded signal? A psychological weapon? A distraction for something worse? The uncertainty ate at them. Soldiers on the ground reported hearing the music coming from the colony's public address system, too. Minho had turned on the speakers in the town square. The same song played on the ground and in space. Alien troops fought their way through mud and water jets, while a woman's sweet voice sang about missing her hometown. Kale, on the flagship, intercepted a ground communication from the human side. He translated it and read it twice to make sure he had it right. It was from a civilian, an older woman, calling Minho's field radio. She said she had left a container of kimchi jjigae at the forward bunker, and that he should eat before the stew got cold. She reminded him to also take the side dishes she had packed separately. Kale set down his headset and stared at the wall. These people were feeding their soldiers homemade stew in the middle of an alien invasion. After 72 hours, it was over. Dren's ground forces were broken. Of the 30,000 troops he had sent down, fewer than 8,000 could still fight. The rest were dead, injured, stuck in liquefied ground, or had simply surrendered. In orbit, the fleet had lost another 2,000 ships, many of them to friendly fire caused by the communications chaos and gravitational disruptions. Dren ordered a full retreat. The fleet pulled away from New Gwangju, leaving thousands of soldiers behind on the surface. As the ships turned to leave, Hana sent one last transmission from the Jindo to the flagship. Her voice was calm and polite. You forgot your soldiers. Do you want us to send them back, or do you want us to hold them for now? Please advise. It was not a taunt. She was genuinely asking. Humanity had captured over 11,000 alien troops, and within hours, Earth's military medical teams had set up field hospitals across the colony. Alien wounded were treated with care and skill. Many of them received better medical attention than they had ever gotten from their own militaries. The prisoners were given food, clean water, and shelter. A few of the colony's grandmothers started bringing them rice cakes too. On the bridge of the retreating flagship, Dren said nothing. He stared at the tactical display, showing the shrinking dot of New Gyeongju behind them. He had sent 30,000 soldiers to conquer a farming colony, defended by 2,000 humans and a bunch of civilians. He had lost, and the humans were asking if he wanted his people back. The war lasted 26 days. In that time, the Galactic Council lost over 28,000 warships and more than 50,000 ground troops. 50,000 soldiers who were not dead, but captured, housed in clean facilities, eating meals prepared by the same species they had been sent to destroy. Humanity's total casualties across every engagement were 47 soldiers wounded. Not one human being had died. The galaxy had never seen anything like it, not the victory itself, because powerful species had won wars before. What the galaxy had never seen was a species win this completely and then do absolutely nothing with it. Earth did not push forward. Earth did not invade Council space. Earth did not send threatening messages or demand territory. Earth went back to normal. The news cycle moved on. People went to work. Ships returned to their patrol routes. It was as if nothing had happened. And that terrified the galaxy more than the tungsten rods ever could. The Council fractured. Of the original 58 species in the combined fleet, 41 had already pulled out during the war. In the days after the retreat from New Gyeongju, 9 more withdrew. The remaining 8 sent a formal request to Volek, demanding that he open peace negotiations immediately or resign. Volek, who had led the council for over 200 years without ever bending, agreed to negotiations. He had no choice. The alternative was the end of the council itself. A neutral station was chosen for the talks. It was a small diplomatic outpost on the edge of council space, far from both Earth and the council's capital. Volek arrived with a full delegation of senior diplomats, military advisors, and legal experts. They prepared for days. They wrote contingency plans for every possible human demand. Financial reparations. Military limitations on council species. Forced technology transfers. Public humiliation. They prepared for all of it because that was what winning species did. They took everything they could. Yuna arrived with 3 people. Herself, a translator who she did not actually need, but brought out of respect for protocol, and a junior aide who carried a gift basket. The gift basket contained dried seaweed snacks, honey rice cakes, roasted barley tea bags, and a small jar of homemade red pepper paste with a handwritten label. Several council delegates stared at it as it was placed on the table. One of them picked up the jar and turned it over in his hands, as if trying to determine whether it was a weapon. Yuna sat down across from Volek. She smiled. It was a worn smile, the kind a person gives when meeting someone they have been looking forward to seeing. Volek did not know what to do with it. "Grand Arbiter," she said, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is not easy." Volek had prepared an opening statement. It was dignified and careful, full of diplomatic language about mutual respect and the unfortunate necessity of conflict. He had practiced it. But something about the way Yuna spoke, the simple kindness in her voice, knocked the words out of his head. He set his notes aside. "You have won," he said. "Name your terms." Yuna did not name her terms. Instead, she asked a question. "Why did the council declare war on us?" Volek blinked. "You know why. Your expansion violated 14 treaties." "Treaties we never signed," Yuna said gently. "But I am not asking about the legal reasons. I am asking about the real reason. Why were you afraid of us?" The room went quiet. Diplomats on both sides of the table shifted in their seats. Nobody asked that kind of question in galactic negotiations. You stated positions. You made demands. You bargained. You did not ask your enemy why they were scared. Volek was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. Because you are fast, he said. Because you appeared out of nowhere and spread across the stars in a single breath of galactic time. Because every model we built, every projection, every simulation told us the same thing. If we did not stop you now, we would not be able to stop you at all. And we did not know what you would do with that power. Yuna nodded. She did not argue. She did not correct him. She listened. You were afraid, she said, because you did not know us, and you did not know us because we never made the effort to let you. That is something I want to change. She placed a thin document on the table. It was Earth's proposed terms for peace. Volek picked it up and read it. Then he read it again. Then he looked at Yuna as if she had lost her mind. The terms were simple. Mutual recognition of existing borders. Establishment of a joint diplomatic commission to prevent future misunderstandings. Free trade agreements between Earth and any willing council species. A technology exchange program. Open cultural exchanges. And at the bottom, a formal apology. From Earth to the Council. Humanity was apologizing to the people who had declared war on them. I do not understand, Volek said. You were afraid of us, Yuna said, and we never gave you a reason not to be. We expanded without talking to you. We built our military without explaining why. We treated the galaxy like it was empty when it was full of people who had been here long before us. That is our failure, and we are sorry for it. Ambassador Teleth, sitting at the far end of the council's delegation, lowered his head. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. Something else. Something that felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. Kale watched the entire negotiation from a feed on the flagship. He watched Volek stare at the document. He watched the council delegates look at each other in confusion. And he watched Yuna sit there, patient and calm, waiting for them to understand something that the galaxy had never considered possible. That a species could win a war completely, totally, without question, and then choose to be kind. Not because they were weak, not because they wanted something, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. Volek signed the agreement that afternoon. He and Yuna shook hands. She offered him a honey rice cake from the gift basket. He took it and ate it slowly, and for a moment, he did not look like the leader of 300 species. He looked like a tired old man who had just been shown that the universe was not as cruel as he thought. Teleth was appointed as the Council's permanent liaison to Earth. He and Yuna walked out of the negotiation room together, talking quietly about trade routes and cultural festivals as if they had known each other for years. Dren resigned his commission the same day. He returned to his quarters on the flagship and sat alone in the dark. He pulled up the battle recordings. He watched the 11-minute massacre at Seoul. He watched the siege of New Gyeongju. He watched Yuna's speech. He played it 3 times. And somewhere in the middle of the third viewing, something in his chest shifted. It was not anger. It was not shame. It was something much harder to carry. It was respect. He whispered to the empty room, "What are they?" He did not get an answer, but he already knew. And that, it turned out, was enough. On the ESS Jindo, far from councils and treaties and history, Dowan sat in his captain's chair. The ship was quiet. Hana was in the engine room, already taking apart a piece of alien technology she had collected during the battle, humming a trot song to herself. The stars outside the window were still and white. A transmission came through from Earth Command. New patrol assignment. Routine border sweep. Sector 7. Nothing special. Dowan accepted the order, stretched his arms above his head, and picked up a fresh cup of ramen from the holder on his armrest. He looked out at the galaxy, took a long slurp of noodles, and smiled.